everybody, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I am reviewing Season 7, Episode 4, which is called Leona. We begin this one with a bunch of guys coming over to the apartment of a guy named Louis Parnell. One of the guys, Mike Apollo, gives him a briefcase of cash and instructions on how to distribute it to officials on behalf of the syndicate. In searching for a lighter, Apollo opens a drawer containing a tape recorder, which Parnell claims is turned off. But it turns out to be voice-activated and is actually working. Apollo tells his boys to take Parnell away for some tough questioning. Jim gets his instructions in a nondescript place. The mission, which for some reason the voice on tape calls a job, your job, Jim, rather than a mission. Parnell was an undercover federal agent, and he's being tortured for information somewhere unknown, and the IMF must rescue him. We get an apartment scene where we learn that the IMF plans to use the friendly, somewhat rivalry between Apollo and another boss, Joe Epic, whose wife Leona drowned accidentally on St. Patrick's Day as part of their plan, the usual gadgetry and the seated Casey. Jim visits Epic's office and flirtily chats up his secretary, Edith, who is actually a spy from Mike Apollo, saying he's an insurance investigator and wants to talk to Epic about his wife's death. When Epic leaves his building, he sees a vision across the street of Casey as Leona reaching out to him. A strategically placed IMF van gets in his way, and Casey disappears into another waiting van, but not before leaving some of Leona's perfume nearby. Once Epic drives away, Willie and Barney get into Epic's apartment, and as well as the adjacent apartment where they set up a base of operations, two-way mirror, bug his phone, and gaslight the rooms. Epic calls Jim to his office. Jim questions him about his wife's death, insinuating that he thinks Joe killed his wife for the money, and he intends to prove it. Later, Joe and Mike have a meal at Mike's restaurant with their boss, Anton, and one of their goons finds Jim hanging around. They tell Jim to get lost, and on his way out, Jim drops a piece of paper, which turns out to be a crude map of the restaurant. The matter is discussed, and often Jim is dismissed as being a surefire way to arouse suspicion. Joe tells them about his vision of Leona as well. Mike looks at the map Jim dropped and sees that it's in Joe's handwriting. Joe returns to his apartment for the night, and the IMF mysteriously turns on his stereo. And then suddenly he hears Casey as Leona humming softly and the shower running, but of course none of those things are actually happening. Later the phone rings and Joe sees an image of Leona in a mirror, asking him to avenge her death. Apollo tells Edith to try and find out more about what Jim is really after, and also gets his man Jules to keep an eye out. Meanwhile, Apollo's goons continue to work Parnell over. Jim returns to Epic's office the next day, making a date with Edith, and this time he tells Joe that he found some new information. Leona apparently was having an affair, and that was likely the motive for Joe killing her. Epic gets predictably angry and tells him in no uncertain terms to leave him alone, but calls the cab company to check to see if there's any truth to the story. Cabbie Willie comes to the office, admitting that he did regularly pick her up on Tuesdays and Thursdays and dropped her off at a corner across town, but hasn't seen her for over a month. Willie takes Epic to the area where he finds doorman Barney, who recognizes her as Miss Davis in 408, but she hasn't been there for quite some time. Joe heads up, and Barney signals the waiting Casey, who watches as he searches the apartment, finding some men's clothes among the women's garments, as well as a picture of Mike Apollo, saying, "All my love, darling." During their night out, Jim tells Edith, before he passes out, that he's helping Joe with his plan to eliminate Apollo and increase his power. Edith calls Mike with the information after Mike gets a visit from Anton saying that Joe has requested a sit-down. Various goons pick up Willie and Barney at gunpoint, and Jules comes to Edith's apartment to get Jim. The sit-down begins, and Epic confronts Apollo, to the surprise of all, saying that Mike killed Leona when she wanted to end their affair. Mike confidently demands that he prove his case, and Willie is brought in to tell his story about driving Leona regularly up until about St. Patrick's Day. Barney is next, confirming what he said earlier, and also that he saw the man in the picture from the apartment visit regularly, and points Mike out from the group. Joe rests his case, so to speak, and Mike claims that he's trumped things up because Joe plans to run him out of the operation. Jim is brought in and asks whether he should say what he said or what he was told to say, enraging Mike. Jim says he does believe that someone drugged and drowned Leona, but now he's not sure whether it was Joe or Mike. Anton tells Cordova to take the three away to a room, which he does, but, well, 3 IMF agents, 1 bad guy, do the math. Apollo says he has an alibi for St. Patrick's Day, and Joe, of course, says he's lying, so Apollo makes a call to his man Kelly to bring Parnell to the sit-down. Jim signals Casey, who's with the police outside. They storm the room, corralling the bad guys, and the IMF rescue Parnell. Jim tells Epic the truth about the deception as they head out. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of a D+. It's right on the border of D. I'm struggling on kind of where it belongs. It's right in the same group with the other episodes that we have seen so far in Season 7. The good. I like the way that the story, at least, as we can say for most of the stories themselves so far in Season 7, and most of them in Season 6 as well. The story is cogent and it makes sense. It's not difficult to follow this story, and fortunately in this one, I don't really see a lot of plot holes. So that's a good sign. Well written here. It reminds me a little bit of Trapped in Season 6, the last episode. Not a great episode, but I did comment that the story at least made sense. In that one, there was a natural way for the IMF to accomplish their mission. It was a separate and mislead mission, somewhat similar to this. In that one, the IMF was exploiting the natural sibling rivalry between two brothers, right? Tale as old as time. Here, we have a similar thing. Joe and Mike are rivals in business. They're frenemies, so to speak, right? I mean, they're friendly enough when they have to be, but you know, as is mentioned a couple of times, like one would very, very easily take over territory or business from the other if the opportunity were to arise, I should say. So it makes sense to create a story and a plot around that. And that kind of anchors the story in the episode. So I'm good with that. Also good, we've got some good guest stars here. Robert Goulet as Joe Epic. The names leave a little bit to be desired. Joe Epic, Mike Apollo, that's a little weird. But, again, I think Robert Goulet is fine. Dewey Martin, who plays Mike Apollo, is also pretty good. He's a pretty prolific character actor. Interestingly, he was kind of towards the end of his career. He's significantly older than he looks in this episode. When in filming this episode, he was in his mid-40s, which was actually really surprising to me. We also see Will Kulava as Anton again. I don't know what it is. I always have a soft spot for Will Kulava. Yeah, great fit for this show in all of the episodes that he's been in. And I think he's been one of those guys who's been once a season ever since season 2, if I remember correctly. So we do have some good things about it. It wasn't boring, let's put it that way. Was it the most exciting episode ever? No, not really. Moving on to some kind of point-counterpoint. In terms of the antagonists, I'm beginning to notice a little bit of a pattern here. In that, I commented in The Deal that it had a problem with the fact that it had multiple antagonists, and, to some extent, they don't really seem like bad guys, in a sense. In that episode, The Deal, we saw General Hammond, played by Lloyd Bachner. He's, a military general trying to take over his country. Okay, that's a bad guy right there. But the other guys in the episode, like Charles Rogan, who was the main target of that episode, I felt about him the same way I feel about these guys, about Joe Epic and Mike Apollo. Okay, they're bad guys. Why are they bad guys? The only reason they're bad guys is because we're told that they're bad guys. In the beginning, we see Mike Apollo doing some bad guy things, we don't really see Joe Epic doing any quote-unquote bad guy things. What we have here is we have what you would call an informed characteristic. They're bad guys because we're told they're bad guys. You might see it in other shows where, like I can remember on some shows that I used to watch, like Dallas Dynasty, those sorts of things, where you would have characters commenting about how dangerous a certain character was, or how beautiful a woman was, or something like that. And whenever you get that, it's usually because the writers are trying to sell you a bill of goods, or they're trying to establish something that they don't really have a way to establish in any other way. Normally, in past seasons and in better episodes, you don't have to be told that these guys are criminals. You can see it. You can see that this is a bad guy and this is kind of why. Perfect example. Go back to last season, The Bride, right, with James Gregory, who had ordered the mail order bride. We can see right away, just from the way that James Gregory was just carrying himself, the way that he was talking, the way that he was acting, okay, this is a guy that we want to see taken out. Here, we've got a guy in Joe Epic who really is, yes, he's a bad guy. He's involved with a crime syndicate. But here in this episode, we're really looking at a guy who just misses his wife, And the IMF is just kind of basically exploiting that. I get it. I understand it. But, I hope what I'm trying to say is coming across. There's not really enough there for me to say, I want to see this guy taken down. And in this case, the most ironic thing is that that's not the mission. These guys are ancillary to the mission. The mission is to rescue Louis Parnell, the federal agent. And the only way, and again, this is kind of a point-counterpoint. I'm going back and forth a little bit. The IMF comes up with the perfect idea. Mike Apollo knows where he is. He's the only guy who knows where he is because he's got him, tucked away someplace. How can we get Mike Apollo to reveal where he is so that we can rescue this guy? Well, we exploit the rivalry with Joe Epic. How can we do that? Well, Joe Epic's wife just tragically died. Let's use that to set it up. I get it. Like I said, it makes sense. It's a cogent story. But does it make, for the purposes of the episode and what unfolds in the screenplay or the TV show, does that generate the right kind of feeling that we're supposed to get with regards to Joe Epic? I almost feel that there might be a subset of people who will say, boy, I just kind of feel sorry for this guy, rather than, boy, it's a good thing, they did this to this guy so that they could complete their mission. I don't know. It's a little bit iffy here. So it puts me in a position where I have to say, okay, how do I feel about these antagonists here? They're not schmucks because the IMF does a very, very good and solid job of setting things up. Are they lame? No more so, I guess is a better way to say it. No more so than the usual type of syndicate-related people that the IMF kind of go after here, in these two seasons. But I really don't feel engaged in wanting to see this whole thing unfold. Not as engaged as I feel I should be. I really don't know what else to say it. And I think really it fundamentally comes down to, if there's going to be antagonists on this show, especially if there's multiple antagonists, they have to do something bad for us to care. Again, if I can just very, very quickly, and I won't go down this road too much, I promise, analogize it to professional wrestling. It's a lot easier when you have a defined bad guy and a defined good guy. When you have kind of shades of gray, things get a lot more complicated. And that, I think, is what we're seeing here a little bit. Shades of gray are not really the best way or really the best methodology of characterizing people in a show like Mission Impossible. That's what I feel. Not good. I think I've just kind of outlined it somewhat. But specific things that are not good. There's not a lot of new ground covered here. The IMF doesn't really do anything here that we haven't seen before. It's just kind of a bit of a new wrinkle to some things. There's zero risk to the mission. At no point is it of any danger of failing, because I guess you can attribute it to some lameness on the part of the antagonists. They're relatively easily manipulated because the IMF can predict exactly what they're going to do. They operate according to a certain set of rules. So if we just set a few things in motion, this is what's going to happen. So I can't say that this was a mission with a high degree of difficulty. It really, really, really was not. And I've already commented about how it's difficult to kind of care about these guys in a sense. One last thing I'm going to mention, then I'll just kind of wrap it up. There's a continuity blip, which really, really seems odd to me, because I don't see this happening a lot. In the middle of the episode, when Barney first appears as the doorman and he's talking to Joe Epic, he says, "Hey, do you recognize this lady?" And Barney says, "Oh yeah, that's Miss Davis in 408. When he gets to the sit down, I had to listen to it again, both parts of it, just to make sure I heard it right. At the sit down, he says, "Oh yeah, that's Miss Evans," like I told you before. Davis Evans. I don't know I don't know whether that was a slip. I don't know whether it just wasn't caught, or whether they just didn't feel like bothering to redo the scene. That was kind of weird, because normally we don't get that kind of continuity, that discontinuity in the show. In looking back, I'm thinking of other episodes where it happened. The only one where I commented on it, because there were quite a few of them, was last season in Mindbend, where there seemed to be a lot of little continuity blips like this. But this is one that really stands out because it was pretty blatant. In terms of the different name that Barney gives. Anyway, I think I'm going to wrap it up for this one. Thank you guys again, as always, for watching. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments. And I will see you next time.